So, ladies and gentlemen, today we talk about the last gen in review because a big day's a-coming.
New console.
What?
Next gen.
Next gen. Yeah, I'm super excited, man. So, this episode's all about setting out pace of what just happened before this gen so that we get a good feeling of how we might be going into the next one. And, our hopes and dreams might not be covered in this one so much. It's mostly about what happened before. Just so everybody kind of knows. I know it's a big, exciting time. Christmas. Real Christmas, not fake Christmas.
Video game Christmas.
Video games.
So yeah, for this we wanted to look back, kind of a We Will Remember You. We will remember you.
Yes.
We did that. So yeah, just to talk about the last gen, where it came from, kind of our earliest memories, that kind of thing. And it's kind of a little bit of a retrospective on the current gen, which will be the last gen in a little short
hard
while.
to believe. It went by quick. But on that note, cue cool music, blah blah. You're listening to music now, yeah. Not that kind of music, but all right. So
I'm Pfarcus.
Widied.
Yeah.
We are here to bring you the awesome stuff. Anyways, so this gen in review, man. So the beginnings. Do you remember the beginnings of this?
I do. I remember camping out at a Walmart. I think I ended up buying the PS4 literally midnight. They had a late opening. I think it was Boxing Day or something where it got released. No, it wouldn't have been Boxing Day. When the hell?
I can't remember. It must have been November. Probably similar. They always try to pre-Christmas so that you can...
But I remember for whatever reason the stores were open at midnight. So I ended up camping out and waiting in line to buy the PS4 at midnight. And then the Xbox I actually got quite a bit later, the Xbox One, as a Christmas gift. Must have been that year. And so I've actually had both of the current gens.
So he started out with the PS4, which is an interesting spot to be in because I actually started the opposite. I started with the Xbox. I was a hyped man off of Titanfall. I remember I looking at the PS4 going, there's no good titles. The PS4 started out, I think it was just all kind of souped up versions of what came out before it on the PS3. But Xbox was toting Titanfall, which was a freaking awesome game to this day. It's one of my favorite shooters, the first and the second. I loved it, even though the second obviously had a bunch of drama around it. But super, super, super good. And I was super Xbox man. I also came off of 360. The 360. Basically, let's set the stage here. So, the beginning of this gen, Nintendo was literally almost nowhere to be found because nobody gave a crap about the Wii U. The Wii U had its followings, granted, but I was never a Wii U guy. I stopped at the Wii. I think I literally had the Wii and played just the big games and then sold it immediately because I had no interest in whether. And so the Wii U came on, I just didn't, I was a 360 guy completely. I had a bunch of games, and so I had a bunch of friends at work, and we always got together and played 360 games. So 360 going in, Xbox One was a clear choice for me. It's interesting to see that PS4. That makes sense though, because you were a PS3 guy.
I was a PS3 guy
going into it, so you had a lot of Sony stuff, and I was basically the opposite, which is kind of curious. And I think at the time, 360 was riding a bit of a high. I mean, obviously. The thing that was unique back then, which was going to be different and as the gen goes on, obviously, but back then, 360 in North America was the system.
It was.
Everybody I know had a 360. A lot of people had a PS3. There were Sony fanboys that existed for sure. But in North America, it felt like 360 was riding the high. And if you were in Japan or wherever, you might have been a Sony guy. And 360, I think Microsoft always had trouble overseas to some degree getting to that audience. I don't think they ever really broke it. But.
Well, I think the Japan market is always going to lean heavily towards Sony and
Nintendo.
Especially Nintendo. But it's kind of interesting because I think there's going to be a little bit of a switch this generation from a lot of early predictions, because that generation, the Xbox was really huge and the PS3 was it wasn't lagging too far behind, but it was just kind of in second place in the race. And then it kind of switched for the PS4 to the Xbox One, where, you know, the PS4, Microsoft did a few things that kind of made people scratch their head when the Xbox One launched. I remember a lot of the online-only stuff was kind of making people scratch their heads.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. We should stick to the beginning. So what was happening at the Xbox? Well, like, what I know Xbox, it messed up right out of the gate, right?
Yeah, well, they had a lot of DRM stuff. There was a lot of rumors that the Xbox One was not going to play secondhand games. Like, you had to be a first original copy to play, and that kind of... I can't remember if it was rumors or if it was something Microsoft ever planned themselves, but it was enough that it kind of got a lot of people angry. And the kind of... Sony kind of swept in and kind of took advantage of that bad PR.
I kind of remember that. Like, they legitimately went in with the game of "we are for the gamers." Like, that was clearly, like, they perceived the issue Microsoft was having out of the gate, which is, it's kind of like you and I talked about it. Microsoft has a bit of a stigma against it as being this big overarching conglomerate. Bill Gates has taken over the world. He's making cows fart methane into gas, and everything's... He's the reason everything's wrong.
Well, Bill Gates invented COVID.
He did, probably. Just quote him on that, not me, but anyway. Fact check. No, but a lot of people definitely see Microsoft as an issue, and it came to bite their bad spot on their backside. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just kind of a yo-yo back and forth, like a little bit of a Pepsi Coke kind of thing, where it's just whatever slip-ups one have, the other takes advantage. And I think in terms of what's coming next, just to, not that we're focused on that, but just to kind of touch on it a little bit, I think it's going to kind of get reversed, where Xbox is kind of doing the backwards compatibility thing a little bit more hardcore than Sony, and doing a lot of, you know, buying a lot of huge companies like Bethesda and things like that. And so they're kind of coming across as the champion of the gamer.
But at that time, they were really the opposite, which is... I think they realized through that, like, the stigma that they actually had to fight. Because I don't think they perceived they had one. And there was a little bit of semblance that, like, a little bit of, like, rumblings in the online sphere for gaming, that people were thinking that Sony might mess up in the same way going into this gen, because I don't want to jump too far ahead here, but like clearly they won. But like they were the ones to lose, have everything to lose, where Microsoft had everything to gain. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. But PS4 came out swinging. They literally just jumped in. They were like, they saw where Microsoft messed up, and they just, everything that they promoted early on was for the gamer, and they captured everybody. And I think everybody just hated Microsoft more so than the system was so much better than the Xbox One. It was just more like they hated Microsoft at the time, so personal boycott.
I think some of that bad blood kind of carried over a little bit. Like, there's one story, and I won't get into details because I'll probably misquote them, but there's one story I heard that kind of went along the lines of that somebody who knew developers for this upcoming gen personally reported that apparently the Sony platform is a little harder to code for, or something along those lines. I remember that. And he got into a lot of slack and got basically harassed online to the point of getting like death threats and things like that.
That's so crazy. You kids gotta chill out.
Don't do that. But it kind of shows that there is a little bit of like that you know, that good guy, bad guy mentality in terms of and I think it just is going to yo-yo a little bit. And it's funny because looking back, like you said, Nintendo on the PS4, Xbox One, when they first launched, Nintendo was kind of very hush-hush. And it's hard to think about now, but I remember...
Nintendo was nowhere, man.
It was nowhere. And I remember even... we were discussing, is Nintendo going to do like Sega, where... for the kids that don't remember, Sega used to actually be in the console wars with the Genesis and the Dreamcast and whatnot, and it's been out of that game for a while now.
How many conversations did we have?
Yeah, to the point where now they're just software developers. They just, that's the only branch they have. We were kind of expecting Nintendo to be the same thing, and then they announced the Switch. And I even remember, it's kind of hard to think about now because it became such a huge boom to Nintendo, but it was to the point where we were like, is this gonna work? I
thought for sure Nintendo was gonna be. I remember being on phones when you were living far away in a faraway land, us talking, and I was like, talk to you, preaching to you almost that, Nintendo is going to go third-party software developer, and I thought it was the smartest thing for them to do, because at the time, obviously, I'm a huge Zelda fan. I love their property. We love their properties. That's Pfarcus' favorite. Anyways, we love Nintendo, but like I would never want a world where there was no Nintendo, just because there's so many properties that they make that I love. But I was almost for sure that they were going to go that direction, because at that point, like the Wii U was literally capturing very little attention.
It became kind of a
gaming. It was a laughing stock in terms of gaming. Like, it had no processing power. The games were good, obviously, because a lot of them got remade as ports for Switches later on. But like at that time, it just nobody like I didn't even want one. I don't even know why, because I love Nintendo, but I just did not want to buy a piece of software or hardware that I knew was severely underpowered and just not like at all what I wanted. But anyways, that's kind of what Nintendo was. So really at the beginnings, PS4 came out swinging, Xbox kind of goofed, and Nintendo was like, meh, we're just doing Nintendo things.
And it's kind of weird because when they snuck in with the Switch, they kind of did something smart where they didn't kind of jump in between Microsoft and PS4, which were kind of like battling it out. Hey, Paco. We have a third aged gamer trying to gain attention.
I guess so. Hey, little guy. Welcome to the show.
We have a third aged gamer here.
Welcome to the show.
But yeah, Nintendo like really picked their battles smart, because while Microsoft and PS4 were kind of head-to-head in combat mode against each other, Nintendo's like, I'm going to go over here. That has nothing to do with that fight. And do
That's what they always do, by the way. They continue to do that. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, and so they kind of did their own thing and just did not get in the middle of that battle whatsoever. Did something that, kind of marched to the beat of its own drum, which I think is kind of has always been Nintendo's MO, just to not really be dictated by the trends, just kind of...
Yeah, toy company really shining through there. Not like the other two, which are very much on the modern trends and threads and VR and all the craziness. But
well, there's even rumors that the Xbox Series X might be considering VR. So they that's the thing about the Sony and Microsoft worlds, is they kind of feed into each other because they're so competitive with each other. When one does something, the other kind of follows. Yeah. And so it kind of creates this yo-yo that I think will continue on to this gen. But it's kind of interesting because looking back, I remember the 360 was like the PS3 killer, and PS3, nobody cared about the PS3. Oh, yeah. And then the PS4 and the Xbox One kind of almost, not quite as dramatic, but almost had the exact opposite, where it's like PS4 rules.
Well, PS3 had a bunch of things going against it too, because when it came out like $100 more expensive than the Xbox, if I remember correctly. And at that time, like they weren't like this is obviously before the beginnings a little bit, but they were not like in a bad spot. The PS2 was huge. It was huge here. I had a PS2. I love my PS2.
Oh, yeah.
And PS3 had no reason to not succeed, but literally they kind of did similar-ish things that Xbox kind of did leading into the last gen that is, well, still the current gen technically, but like where they just sort of goofed up and thought, oh, people will do whatever we want because we have everything, and it's not really how it goes. You have to really cater to your audience a little bit, because the competition's good. I mean, really at the end of the day, the PS3, Xbox 360 were close enough that there wasn't really anything that the system couldn't do other than the other one. It mostly comes down to software, and that's going to be kind of a trend that picks up through this whole discussion, I think, where it's like your software and your services really are what's going to sell. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, too, because and again, this comes back to like when one does something, the other kind of has to follow with Microsoft and Sony. But I remember the PS3 was apparently notoriously hard to program for because it had its own proprietary architecture in terms of like the GPU and stuff. Yeah. The PS4 and the Xbox One kind of leaned more towards having the same architecture, and I don't even think the PS5 and the Xbox Series X.
Oh, that discussion is.
I think they have kind of the same architecture, and again, that's not a discussion.
But it's still it's an interesting topic. We definitely have to.
We'll look into it more for sure as it goes, but. It's just kind of interesting, and again, there's Nintendo. It's like, I'll just do my own thing.
It's a me me, a Nintendo. Yeah, so they just, like, it was really, that's just the curious thing about it. It's like Nintendo's not really in the discussion. Continues to stay out of the discussion for a large chunk of that gen. Because, like, if you think about it, the Wii U was its primary system for, like, most of the existence of the Xbox One and PS4. Like, the Switch is a late... The Switch is going to be battling the current gen to some degree in anyways. But that's like a whole other thing. Like, this Nintendo era, they were just not there. Like, honestly. Other than the diehard fans, there were people, like, kudos to all y'all who stuck with them. But, like, they did make it hard, like, for the average gamer to want to, like...
Well, I think the whole Wii and the Wii U, I think they both were, like... Because Nintendo has...
The Wii was cool, and arguably one of the best-selling systems. I think maybe even the best-selling system. I can't remember.
It was huge. It was
huge, massive.
Yeah.
But it was gimmicky.
It was very gimmicky, and I think the Wii U kind of... Because I think one of the Nintendo's strong points and its weak points at the same time is that it's... Nintendo's constantly very willing to innovate and do really crazy things that nobody else is really thinking about. You look back, and this goes back as far as pretty much the beginnings of Nintendo. You have, like, even, like, the Virtual Boy, which was kind of like that era's Wii U, where nobody really caught on to it. But that was an early, like, that was virtual reality in when? Like, the early 2000s, maybe even the 90s?
Yeah, they always dare to be different, so...
Yeah. Like
you said, it is kind of their boon and their bane. Like, they make it work sometimes, and sometimes they really don't. And they were really going through a downward spiral at that point, where, like, the Wii was fantastic in a sense because everybody bought one. Even I did, even though I clearly saw the gimmick early on, and I really wasn't interested in sticking with it, like, as a gamer. But, like, they did come up with some fantastic games. Like, Mario Galaxy was amazing,
Sunshine.
Twilight Princess, obviously, I love that game.
Sunshine was
GameCube.
Oh, my bad.
But they came up with a bunch of fantastic games. But the thing is, they were all first party, and you played most of them right out of the gate. The only one, like, they did have a couple that came out later, like Skyward Sword and stuff. But, like, for the most part, most of them were right out of the gate. So you could literally buy a Wii, play all the games, which I did fast, and then sell the system and be like, okay, I have that experience now.
I've beaten the console.
Yeah, I've beaten the console because they came up with some other games too. But, like, for all intents and purposes, that's what I think a lot of people did. I've seen a ton of people do that with the Wii.
Yeah.
Unless they were like, and then, like, or they gave it to their mothers who just continued to play their exercise games or whatever the heck it was, their grandparents.
Well, I think that's why it was successful, is that a lot of people that weren't necessarily gamers latched onto the Wii U. Not the Wii U, but the Wii. Yeah. Because, like you said, the soccer mom that just wanted to swing around and kind of...
It was like, it didn't have a gamer aesthetic to it, right? Like, you didn't have to sit there with your controller and be a master of whatever, like, first-person shooter games or whatever type of games where, like, other systems were creating. Like, there was much more fun and fluid experiences.
I will say this, though, that I remember early in the Wii life cycle, I played this little... It's like one of the Mario Party type games. I can't remember if it was Mario Party, but there's a lot of games that, like, this was the motion you had to do.
Oh yeah.
Like, you had to shake a paint can vigorously, and it was just, I don't know if they realized the optics of having a bunch of people in a room making that gesture.
Well, the very first Switch game was that, like, the same one that was, like, just as horrible, wasn't it? Like the 1, 2, 3 Switch or whatever.
Yeah, it might have been one of those.
One of them, they didn't get any better at that. Yeah, no, that was a Nintendo thing for sure.
Well, I think it's the danger of innovation, right? Is you can accidentally become a joke. And I think it's what happened a little bit with the Wii, like, much later on, because I think people kind of, like, were enraptured by the novelty of motion control so much that they didn't realize they were sitting there vigorously shaking their Joy-Con. Just censor the whole thing. But what's interesting, though, is I feel like in many ways the Wii U was a little bit like a pre-Switch in that they were experimenting with a lot of, like the screen on your controller kind of reminds me of the Switch a little bit, but
for the Wii U?
Yeah. So I feel like none of their experiments ever were in vain. Even the Virtual Boy, even though Nintendo didn't continue down the virtual reality path. I think the popularity of virtual reality today, there we go, is largely in part by their willingness to step into that category and to take the risk. And I don't think anybody's going to say that the Virtual Boy is going to be one of the hallmarks of virtual reality that people are proud of. Yes. But it was them willing to at least take the chance. And
Nintendo's good at doing that. I feel sometimes they just have to be reeled back into reality. Like, I think when they did the Wii U and the Wii, they didn't realize that, this is not the core gamer experience. We're not talking to them anymore. And then they had to realize that they still have to talk to us in order for us to be interested.
Yeah.
And then they sort of find like the happy medium, which is where I think like they end up going. But for that whole generation, that start of this gen and sort of the tail end of the last, they really didn't have much of a clue of what they were supposed to be doing. They were working towards something. But anyways, so that's pretty much the beginning and the wraps. Nintendo nowhere, PS4 came out swinging, Xbox kind of dropped the ball.
A little bit, yeah.
And they had everything to lose, and they did.
I think they...
that gen, anyways.
Yeah, and when we say lose, we're kind of talking... what's the word? For when you're comparing two things.
Oh, comparing two things. The word. No.
We were talking about, like, in the perspective of Sony versus Microsoft. When we say one of them lose, we don't mean, Microsoft is poor, sitting there
crying.
No.
I say that as, like, being a former, at least at that point, I was an Xbox guy. Like, I'm not ashamed to say it. Like, they didn't do the right moves, and it did hurt. I bought Xbox. I was Xbox out of the gate. I didn't own a PS4, actually, for a while. Until my rich friend came and bought me one and forced me to enjoy it.
At gunpoint.
Yep. And so I was an Xbox guy. So to say that is no, I don't say it lightly, but they did kind of lose the beginning of this.
I think so, yeah. Because, when you think of, like, in terms of these companies, to gain that upper hand is such a huge thing, and it's not a huge margin by anybody's perspective except for them.
It's momentum. That's all it is, right?
Yeah.
And they lost a lot of steam, and they had all of the steam basically up until that point. 360 was huge. There wasn't a game that wouldn't dare to come out for the 360 because so many kids in North America had one, right? And
what's interesting though is looking back, the PS4 and the Xbox One. Right out of the gate, I remember the PS4 had quite a lot of exclusives, and so did Microsoft. And after a while, I feel like, and this might be a discussion for another video, but I feel like at a certain point that there was kind of like a death of the exclusive that happened, where you started losing out on the Halos and the Crash Bandicoots, which I suppose both of them are technically coming back. Crash Bandicoot 4 just dropped on the PS4, but I remember, I remember the PS4's launch. They had a lot of remakes of PS3 games, like a lot.
Almost all. I think I don't know if they had like maybe one or two. Killzone was like one, but they weren't very popular titles. They never really. I don't think any Sony title that came out was like one that mainstay.
Yeah, which was good for people who skipped out on the PS3 era. Because I remember that was one of the things you actually were you felt like you were catching up.
Yeah,
right?
well, because Last of Us at that point was a great game, and I get to play that because that's one that came with my system. And by that time, like there was all these other games that you were. Uncharted. I think I ended up picking up at that point also the Uncharted triple pack there with the first,
Legacy
the second,
or whatever
the third,
it is. Yeah.
I ended up getting like the download card. I bought it from some dude who didn't need it online, and I played all those games. They were fantastic. So I had a lot of backlog to do that I just never experienced.
Even one of my favorite games, Shadow of the Colossus. Shadow of the Colossus, for those who didn't hear through the cough. I remember that remake actually really blew me. Let me rephrase that. I remember that remake kind of really piqued my interest, but I never ended up buying it just because I played the ever-loving crap out of the original.
I actually remember you when you were obsessed with that game. Like we've known each other forever, but I remember you like talking to me about it, and I don't know if I didn't own the system then or what have you. I know I definitely didn't have the game.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I had it's a PS2 that came out.
I want to say it
right?
was a PS2, yeah.
So I'm sure I had, or maybe it came out for PS3. I can't remember. Anyways, I didn't have it, but you talked a lot about that game at the time. You were obsessed with it.
But yeah, like I remember that game when it came out, and again, it seems weird because so many games have kind of copied a lot of what it innovated to the point where it's kind of lost its charm as the innovator. But, you know, at the time, there was not any game like it where you crawled on these gigantic forms, beasts that were just roaming around and conquered them. And that sense of excitement over conquering something that seemed unfathomable.
Yeah, I remember that. It was that everybody talked about. It was like the creatures, the large puzzles, basically. And it was a fantastic game. I actually did end up getting the remake because I never played it again. One of those ones I never got to play. So I played a little bit of it. I got a little bit sidetracked in the backlog, but it was fun. It is a fun game. Like, even the remake is fantastic. So I got to go back and try to finish it at some point. But anyways, that pretty much summarizes the beginnings pretty well. I think now for the middle discussion is where things get a little interesting. Like, I think the middle is where all of the surprises sort of pick up. I mean, no surprise, spoiler alert, Sony wins, and it starts in the middle when they start dishing out millions and millions of titles that are just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Honestly, some of the best games of this generation were Sony games for sure. And not to knock on Xbox or Nintendo, but they definitely have their wins. But like, I felt like Sony just nailed it, and so like God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, the list is endless. Really, like there's just two, and I know I've played it. Like, there's so many strong like Sony games, and like that you literally convinced me to go Sony, and as soon as I did. Because I did have a bit of a crisis in the middle, like, because I was Xbox, like I explained, right at the gate, and so I was seeing you get all these freaking awesome games, and I was like, I got my Halo. There you go, and you play your one game that came out a year, or every whatever amount of years, like so Xbox was being starved. I think it felt like that as a fan. I was like, and you could even get a sense online because you'd see the forums and stuff, be like, when are we ever going to get an exclusive? God dang it, every good game comes across all the systems, right? And like, at that time too, like, even the games that were shared were coming out better on the PS4, like Destiny. Yeah. I remember Destiny came out, it's like, Xbox gets everything 10 years later. And it's like, what?
Well, that was interesting because that was something that I don't think it ever existed before that generation, was the idea of the timed exclusive.
No,
it wasn't exclusive.
Really bizarre. I didn't like it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I get what they were doing, but I thought that was like a cheap maneuver. It's like, why would you release a game not on parity that's obviously supposed to be released on parity?
Yeah. Well, obviously they coded it for both consoles in order to not be an exclusive in the first place. So the idea of a timed exclusive is a little bit like a sales gimmick, a little bit. Like,
yeah, it was really obnoxious. Hopefully they get away from that crap. But it's like, either be exclusive or not, please.
Yeah.
Don't, because, anyways, that was obnoxious. But yeah, so like coming out of the gate, I remember feeling starved. You know, like, oh, Sony's got everything, and then that he wasn't lying. So I ended up getting a PS4, and yeah, I mean, honestly, the middle, you could just paint the middle as just Sony.
Yeah,
Sony runs away with it. With the tail end, I want to say, what year did the Switch come out? It's like 3 years old now, right?
Something like that, yeah. It was. I remember it was very late in this gen's cycle.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the tail end of it. So, like 2016?
Yeah, sounds about right, actually, yeah.
So, yeah, I think the middle is...
I can put up whatever.
Yeah, the extra stats, but literally the middle is painted by the PS4 dominance. I don't think they did anything wrong that I can think of. Like Xbox just sort of continued on. I remember being a bit starved. I remember being like, oh my God, when are we ever going to get a good... Like, we got, like, random games, like, what was that one with the kid in the skate, where he had to keep moving the whole time, and I found it...
Oh, yeah, Sunset Overdrive.
Sunset Overdrive, and, like, we got weird stuff like that, and I think that trend even kind of continues, although I think in the later part of the season, they did hit some good strides with, like, Sea of Thieves and things that I thought was interesting.
Well, I think that was when Microsoft was starting to realize, oh crap, we have a hole in the boat, so to speak, that we need to patch, right?
Yeah. I don't think they expected to be starved out. Like I don't think they quite realized that Sony was doing a takeover.
Yeah. I think they kind of got a little spoiled by their 360 success, where they were like, we can do no wrong.
Yeah, we'll just put a good system out there, and the games shall come.
Well, and that's what kind of happened. Is that maybe not so much in terms of the hardware, but in terms of the software, they didn't really concern themselves enough. I don't think, to the point where Sony was like, well, here's an opportunity. They're not paying attention. We can get all these exclusives. Even to the point of hardware-wise, like the PSVR, I don't think it was necessarily the straw that broke the camel's back, per se, but I think it was definitely something that skewed people towards Sony, because Microsoft really wasn't offering anything equivalent.
Yeah.
Obviously, this upcoming gen, we don't know for sure whether or not Microsoft is going to throw their throw their hats in the ring, so to speak, for that. But it'd be definitely curious. I wouldn't be surprised if they do, to be honest, because that seems to be kind of the trend. Is whatever one person's not paying attention between Sony and Microsoft, the other person kind of grabs the opportunity to.
But I think being the loser, so to speak, and it's just figurative. It's not obviously, as you said, no real loser in that sense, but like
relative.
That's
the word I was
relative. And it gives them a chance to kind of like redefine themselves a little bit, because they have more play. When you're in the lead, I guess it's probably harder, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Sony seems to be handling really good right now, I'll be honest. Although I do think Microsoft is doing a better job. Anyways, that's...
Yeah. Well, it's funny because it's a little bit like a King of the Hill game, or Capture the Flag game, I should say, where, you have Sony and Microsoft are fighting for the flag. Meanwhile, Nintendo's just kind of sitting eating popcorn on the sidelines.
We lost already, guys. Let's just see what these crazy guys do, and then come up here with our crazy left hook, which is actually what happens. So fast forward to Sony dominating basically the whole sphere, and we get 2016. You can correct me on
if it's wrong.
The Switch, which honestly that totally surprised me, because I didn't expect. I told Pfarcus I expected Nintendo to go third party, and when they announced, when the first things, I think it was called, what was it called? The Switch was out of the gate. They had a different name for it, like Code N or something. Like,
I can't remember.
Anyways, it was like it came out for a while that Nintendo was having a new system. I was like, oh, okay.
Well, I remember they kind of did a little bit of a bait and switch, because they kept what they did
and switch.
Because what they did was the only thing they were releasing was that they were working on something mobile, which made a lot of us think, I think, are they just going to make phone games from this point forward?
Yeah.
But obviously what they meant was mobile in the respect that you could move around with the Switch.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's what anybody was expecting with the term mobile, which was kind of clever on Nintendo's part.
Well, they definitely did some clever things, because they definitely figured out how to talk to the gamer more, and not just this crazy offshoot idea toy thing that they had. Like, and they still do it, mind you, but like they're including the gamer in the conversation. So the Switch comes out, and honestly, to my surprise, is probably, if I was to give a label on me personally as the winner of this entire gen, it's Nintendo. Because I loved the Switch. It's not that they won by the numbers per se right yet. I do think that they could overtake Sony's PlayStation 4 in time. They started way behind the gate, don't forget. So, but I did, like, Nintendo brought me on board, because the Switch was everything I was looking for in a gaming system.
Actually, even in terms of, like, the whole purpose of this channel is to talk about, like, gaming as an adult. One of the things me and you talked about a lot is, with the major fighters between Sony and Microsoft, both of them are competing for your living room TV, essentially.
Yeah.
Where if you have a family, that's kind of a volatile space.
Because that was, sorry, not to interrupt, but that was even like before we step away from this point too much, is that was even one of like Microsoft's thing at the beginning, to your point about like they were competing for the living room, because they actually, Microsoft's biggest shtick was that it was like supposed to be all of your entertainment, media
it's
box,
the one
everything
box.
you want, And like even to the makeup of the general system, the way it integrates with your cable system and stuff, like it was made an attempt on that.
Yeah.
Sorry, that just one.
Well, I mean, that gets back to why Nintendo was so smart to kind of not even pick a fight on that hill. Is they said, well, no, we can actually offer you a chance that if your wife or your children or anybody are playing Sony or Microsoft's console on the living room TV, well, guess what? You can pick up this Switch and go. Or even just sit beside them and play a different game, and you're not fighting for the living room TV. And it's weird because like everything Nintendo did PR wise kind of reflects in terms of the hardware, even where it's all about not fighting, like being kind of like we're winning but not fighting. Yeah, exactly. Which I think was brilliant. It was really brilliant.
Brilliant move on their part, and I think if they would have came out with another gimmick. Like complete gimmick like the Wii, I think it would have just flopped terribly. But they actually spoke a lot to the gamer. They had things like the Pro Controller. They had games that were contemporary games on other
even the indie market
and their indie markets. They brought in. They made it basically. They upgraded their eShop from what I understand. Even though I wasn't a Wii U guy, but from everything I understand, their whole online infrastructure, even though their online still weak in comparison, it's still a lot better than what they offered before. And it's definitely taken a step in the right direction in the sense of modernizing. And I think that's what they needed to do. They needed to include us, the gamer, into whatever path they were going forward. And I think they also kind of picked a demographic of people, accidentally maybe, in the sense that older gamers don't get to sit in front of the couch as much as they'd like.
Well, like I said, we can lose that battle with our wives or children or whatever.
Just life. There's a ton of distractions. But you know what? Sounds silly, grabbing the Switch and going to the washroom, whatever 10-minute break you have.
I call it the best poop machine.
Period.
Yeah.
And it's true. It's like there's so many, you don't realize, because that's kind of where the mobile market in general, even your phone, right? You go to the washroom, now you take your phone. You go with all these you're just trying to gain back little bits of the day.
Yeah.
Well, the Switch gives you an opportunity to gain back some of your gaming. So a lot of people who kind of grew older and just grew out of gaming in general were able to see this machine as like a second life to that.
Yeah.
It was like they breathed gaming back into life. There's a ton of people that wrote articles or videos or posts on Facebook or whatever social media and came out where it's like, thank you, Switch. You brought gaming back. I can be a gamer again where I was starting to not be able to.
Well, I mean, even think of like the cliche of the two kids in the backseat of the car. Like, if you have a Switch, you have two controllers right there built. Like everywhere you go, you have a 2-player system that's ready to go.
Yeah.
Even in terms of like the Game Boy, didn't really even have that. You had you potentially could have a fight with two kids over who gets to play the Game Boy.
Yeah, it's just a single solitary device.
Yeah, and just with how portable the Switch is in general, like it's like I said, it's a very pacifist machine in the respect that like it's never forcing you to fight for your ability to game. And I think as adults, our time is more and more precious the more and more responsibilities kind of get lumped onto our plate. I think it's huge, right?
It is huge. And I think Nintendo made the wisest decision. I mean, in no means are we saying the Switch was as powerful as these other systems, but it was a percentage of the power, and just enough to get a lot of good titles from them, like Witcher 3.
Doom.
Yeah, that one blew everybody's mind.
It ran Doom.
Skyrim.
Neither of us are Skyrim fans, but yeah.
But, there's only so much of an AD&D, or you know what I mean, a Ritalin Junkies D&D session.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. You're like a dragon, werewolf, vampire, and within the first 5 minutes of the game, like it's stupid. Anyway, don't get on that. But
flame on.
Yeah, all these Skyrim fans. No. I don't. Even if you are a Skyrim fan, you can still be happy. I think I bought the game 30 times trying to.
We both did. We both have. You bought Skyrim on the Switch too.
Yeah. Way too many times. Every time I'm going to tell myself I'm going to buy it and beat it, and I never do. And so the Switch was the last time.
Well, actually, even the Switch kind of, even in fairness, kind of convinced us to buy Skyrim another time because
they can run Skyrim.
Well, it wasn't so much that, in as much as both of us had the same thought, where we're like, maybe if we can play Skyrim when we poop,
maybe it'll be more interesting. And you know what? I shit on the game, and this don't mean to like sidetrack it into the game, but like. the game's little stories were okay. It was just, if you look at it objectively, you take a step back and look at what's going on, it's ridiculous.
I consider it a jukebox of games.
Yeah, that's what it should be. It's just silly. Anyways, yeah, so like the Switch had brought enough new things that it made you feel like you could be a gamer in a contemporary sense, because you were getting things like Witcher, which I really did want to finish. I've always wanted to, and I did. Thank you, Nintendo. You know, Doom, which I play anyways on the other gen. There are, like, I use the current gen in a way that, like, the big titles that I know I'm going to love, I will always buy and play on the bigger systems. Yeah. But, like, sometimes, if it comes out on Switch, I might wait, because I know I'll play it where I want to, and in a much more complete way on the Switch, because, like,
well, I think also
it's a better experience.
I think for me, it boils down to a little bit of a discussion that could be kind of a broader discussion we do on another video, but it boils down to like the art direction games that are all about like how impressive of a visual can we show you. I tend to buy those on like the living room TV, ones that have a little bit more processing power.
Doom.
Like Doom.
Oddly enough, even though I think I bought it on all the systems.
I did too.
Love Doom.
Like those I tend to buy first.
Screw you, Microsoft, for taking my Doom.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Spoiler.
But anyways, so it depends on the type of game. Like I remember Mortal Kombat, the newest Mortal Kombat. I hate to say it, but played much better on the TV consoles. Let's call them.
Yeah. Although they did tighten up the Switch one, it does look a lot better.
Patched it up or whatever.
Like I think I tried it up, booted up the other day, and it looked better.
Fair enough. So I think Nintendo kind of really played everything smart, and I think they're probably going to continue that trend, in all honesty, through the next gen. I don't know what their plans are, if they have any plans for...
There's a plan for a Pro, but I think that's strategic in the sense that it's kind of what they did here. You know how like they don't necessarily want to bring God of War and Halo to their system, but maybe they do, but they're not trying to get like those games, but they want to be able to bring in some of those other games, maybe pare down a little bit to their system, whatever their capabilities are, but like The Witcher, that type of thing. So I think in order to keep up with the next wave, they kind of do need that Pro. That's another discussion we can get into, but like I think they will try to step into that ring again, where they give you another offering that can just also leak the smaller, like the games that they want to bring into their platform, like Witchers and the different types of stuff. Because they might get to a situation where they can't really do that in the current Switch, because the next leap is big enough that I think it would just cause disaster for that system to run. But
it's kind of interesting, because I think even thinking in terms of what I was saying about like the big companies kind of taking each other's morsels, so to speak, relates to this as well, where I think Microsoft kind of looked at what Nintendo was doing with the independent market and the indie games. And, Microsoft actually spent a lot of money trying to focus on the developers of their consoles. And I think that was really smart as well. Because, when you think back to, like, I even remember when the original PS1 launched, it launched with something stupid, like 1,000 games right out of the box. Yeah. And there was just games galore. And that kind of got pared down, obviously, a little bit, because I don't even know how they managed that for the PS1. But, when you think of the indie market, right out of the box, you have such a weird and eccentric library of possibilities. Like one of my favorite games is The Binding of Isaac.
That came out early on the Switch. We both got it. Yeah,
which is amazing on the Switch, because it plays perfect to that platform.
Because when you first got the Switch around that time, you came from where you used to live. You actually visited us, remember?
Yeah.
And we played that and Mario Rabbids, I think.
Mario Rabbids was one of my favorite. Yeah, I love that game.
The Switch had strong titles, like they had Breath of the Wild out of the gate, which is arguably one of my favorite games, right? And so... Yeah. Like, the Switch did nothing wrong when it first came out, other than maybe, I don't even know. I think it did everything right. I know there's, like, things to complain about, but, like, overall, that system just tickled me the right way, I guess. I loved it, and I continue to love it.
It's still my bathroom reader, so to speak.
It's still my, actually, go-to system. If I have a choice to buy it, other than, like, the pretty visual thing, like you were saying, I almost always buy Switch, just because of the comfortability of just being able to, like you say, do it whenever you need to, wherever you need to. And it fits my lifestyle. It fits adult lifestyle a little better, I think.
Yeah, so I think for us, in terms of this gen, I think the Switch was the major winner. For me, the PS4 and the Xbox kind of ended up equaling out in the long term, because like you said, when the PS4 early on, it kind of developed momentum in terms of like the titles they were picking out. But I ended up having both the PS4 and
Yeah, we both did.
the Xbox One, and I think I was kind of the first one to have both out of the two of us, and so I've kind of just followed along the momentum, and Microsoft fixed a lot of the problems out of the gate. I think the bad PR of their launch carried over to kind of give Sony an edge, and I think even to this day there's a little bit of bad blood in terms of the Microsoft fanboys that felt burnt a little bit and turned to the Sony side.
Even they had to kind of not agree, because I was one of them, right? Where it's like at first I was like, oh, it's not a big deal, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it became a big deal. And yeah, Sony, I got a Sony, and I played Sony, and to the point where like most of my games for last gen, at least the last gen quality games, Switch aside, my Switch library is probably bigger than all of them now, but Sony had most of my attention last gen for sure. But to your point, like the winners of this gen, it's subjective for sure, I think, like, but I honestly think overall for me, Nintendo was probably the biggest winner, because they literally came from nothing.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, they had zero.
We thought, I hate to say it, but we thought they were dead.
I thought they were a third-party company, like they were headed that way. I mean, it's kind of silly, but it was also kind of where I wanted, because I knew they had failed me so hard with the other two kind of systems that I was like, oh, I hope they do this, because I didn't foresee me ever buying another Nintendo system, because I was like, there's no way they're going to make a system that's going to appeal to me over the PS4 or the PS5 or the Xbox or whatever. I was like, there's no way they're going to do it, and then they did. So for me, the total winner of last gen was Nintendo. I've put a ton of money into that system since it's been out, in terms of games, in terms of even like, I think it's the first time I've ever accessorized very much in a system. So I've got like controllers and Joy-Cons and different things and Switch dock covers and just stupid stuff, because you just kind of get proud of having this thing. It's kind of weird that had that effect, but I really think they're a winner. Overall though, I think Sony probably objectively won, in the sense that they just had the strongest.
I think they had the strongest sales, and
continual. I do think the Switch can catch up and maybe even dominate it in the future. Like the Nintendo brand is definitely in a good spot.
Yeah.
But I think Sony overall won. They never ever dropped the ball. They continuously released good game after good game, and were there duds? Sure, but like very few and far between. Really, most of them were interesting. For the most part, I think they had an audience, and sometimes they had everybody's attention. Like God of War and Horizon Zero Dawn, like those games were phenomenal. Bloodborne, yeah, all like there's a ton of good sounding stuff, and Microsoft kind of struggled even all the way towards the end. They tried to get more and more exclusives, but their exclusives were just lackluster. Like they had that one zombie one that nobody really cared about. They had one that kept getting delayed. I forget what it was called, but it was an action. It was like a Space Cops or something. It was so uninteresting, I can't even remember the name. Never ever got into it.
Space Cops.
The last game that I found interesting is because it stuck out so much was Sea of Thieves, and I actually genuinely enjoyed that game.
Me too.
I thought it was a fun little experience, and it deserves a lot of respect.
The environmental storytelling in that game was really, really great.
Yeah, it felt really unique, but it was really a lot of fun for us when we were like distanced as friends, because we could get on, sail a ship, talk about what happened, whatever, and then fight a battle.
It's a very good hanging out game.
Yeah, and so like if you have friends that you just want to spend time with and you don't really get a chance, it was really good for that. And so, in a way, Microsoft, I think towards the end, started feeling out what it was doing wrong. Like you got a sense that it was trying to climb its way back. It kind of stuck its tail between its legs. Game Pass was a very interesting idea that they kind of came out with it kind of towards the end.
I never really was interested in Game Pass until the next-gen consoles got announced, because I started to think about it, and I'm like, if I get a console, the Xbox Series X with Game Pass, then out of the box I have hundreds of games.
So you have tons of games, out of the box, and I think they give you even a deal on having it for like a year or maybe even two. I don't know. But Sony, leading into this gen and the tail end of last gen, I think Microsoft started to get its act together, started to figure out ways like Game Pass. Like early out of the gate, they were trying to say, "Oh, we're going to go all digital," but you were really just peeing in everybody's cornflakes at that moment because not everybody wants to go digital, and not everybody wanted this sort of. I feel like Microsoft's trying to like strong arm everybody in a particular direction, which we all kind of know it's going to end up anyways. But there's going to be some resistance because there's a lot of old gamers like me who still want to have a hard.
Well, I think. I think there's the oldness of it. Like we come in the cartridge days where we had physical. Back in the day, you had a physical cartridge that was basically a motherboard sewed into the cart that you slammed into your machine, and you had an onion on your belt, which was the style at the time. But for us, like having a physical copy just feels right. It took me a lot of effort to go digital. Now I'm kind of leaning a little bit more towards digital, actually, just because I moved. Well, I moved around so much that like carrying a big case full of games is not as attractive to me as it used to be as a kid. But I think the collectors will always want physical copies, regardless. I don't even think it's an age thing per se. I think like physical things that can kind of
represent them. I mean, games are to the point now where there's so many people that do them that legitimately they are representing what people do and dream about right now. So like there are people obviously through YouTube and everything else, and us included, where we love games so much they become a part of our personality and a part of who we are and our identity, and in terms of our interests, and it's hard to deny that. So I think who were the winners? We were the winners. All of us. We got all kinds of games. And I do think going into next gen, some exciting things on the table. Hopefully, everybody gets a fair shot. I think they will.
I think so too. I think there's no losers in the respect. I don't think any of the three companies we talked about are in any risk whatsoever of becoming bankrupt, for example. Obviously, when it comes to like sales, there is like, whoever gets the biggest number wins, so to speak, right? But
it's fun to postulate on that stuff, which is what we're doing, right? Like you said, we're not really saying anybody's lost, there's a loser. We always have almost all the systems, so I mean, we support everything. We just love gaming, so I mean. But it is kind of fun to kind of point out to who did what right and who did what wrong.
I think, and even in terms of like talking about older gamers, like we come back from the era where you had the Super Nintendo and the Genesis kids fighting. Like I remember as a kid being like, Genesis. Like there was a marketing campaign that Sega and Nintendo had early in the day where like Genesis does what Nintendo don't.
What Nintendo don't.
I don't know if you remember those commercials, but there's a very like camaraderie kind of.
Actually, there was a funny interview I read about. It was from Miyamoto, I think, or somebody on the Nintendo side, who was recollecting about kind of all the different types of Mario clones that came out, and of all of them, he had the most respect for Sonic. Because he thought Sonic was like a unique enough character that on his own right, and that they did kind of the development of him right, and and so I thought that was kind of a fun but nice gesture all the same. He didn't go to say that he was obviously a clone, because he's like to some degree modeled after the success of Mario. But.
And even if you know anything about the history of the development, that was actually the intent of Sonic. Was Sega was like, we need something as iconic as Mario, and then so they started to develop.
Just so happened they did it.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, Nintendo then released Sonic games on the Switch, which is kind of mind-blowing for us, where it was like Sega, Nintendo were like head-to-head fighting, and then you have like Mario and Sonic on the same console. It's just...
And they got the the last laugh in terms of movies, because the Sonic movie blew the Mario movie out of the freaking water.
Controversial take, the Mario Brothers movie was not good. Sorry. Sorry, you know who.
Yeah, I do know who. Yes. Yes. So, one last... This is, sorry, totally off place, but one thing that really struck me unique in this whole, like, going out of this gen and into the new, one of the last things that I thought was an interesting move on one of these companies' part is Xbox and Nintendo kind of joining forces in this quasi way to kind of like combat Sony. I thought that was really interesting play on Microsoft's part more than anything. So Nintendo, it makes sense because they're almost like they get everything from this deal. I don't even notice they haven't given up anything. It's Microsoft that's been like, here, take a property here. Here, take a property there. And I know it's to get their kind of their IPs in the Japanese market.
So I don't know much about this, to be honest.
So basically, Nintendo and Xbox quasi became friends in some way, and even like to the point where Phil Spencer and some of the other Xbox heads have kind of openly admitted that they love Nintendo and they don't want Nintendo to go anywhere. So they've been kind of like, you have Cuphead on the Switch, there's a bunch of other games like they're mostly smaller titles. I don't think we'll ever see. I think they've kind of already came out and said they won't ever put Game Pass on there. Like, it was rumored at one point. So you won't see Halo or anything like that, or some of these other streaming services come to the Switch. I don't think they want you to be able to play their
entire
library on the Switch because it kind of like really depletes the point of having Xbox. But they do want you to have the odd game so that you kind of get like the Microsoft name in your head, I guess.
Well, I think Nintendo, in terms of PR, and we've talked about this quite a bit before, how like people older than us, and maybe even some people our age, call it like everything a Nintendo. like it's kind of like how you call every tissue paper a Kleenex. Nintendo kind of has that.
Yeah, my parents never called any other system that I've ever owned.
Like, here, we got you a Nintendo.
Yeah. Thanks for the Xbox, Ma. Nintendo. Xbox. Yeah. No, anyways, I think it was kind of a one-way relationship actually, though, until just recently Smash Brothers included the Minecraft game, which is...
I noticed that. I don't know much about it, but...
property, right? So, which I don't know if it's like... I think Nintendo always just makes a point of, like, if your game property achieves kind of their level of, notoriety, then you get to be welcomed into this epic fighting game of sorts. And so it's kind of good for them, because everybody kind of thought it would be interesting, because it was mostly, for the most part, if you ever noticed, it was all Japanese companies that had games in it. That's the first American.
I remember, and I don't know if it was a joke or a rumor or what, but I remember early on in Smash Brothers development when people didn't know what the new characters were going to be. There was a lot of rumors that like Master Chief's coming to...
Yeah, Doom Guy was another one. People were speculating which would have been awesome.
Which technically could happen, because now that Microsoft owns Bethesda, they own Doom Guy. So.
Potentially, now that there's a cozy Nintendo Xbox thing. But it is good for them to do, because I think Xbox, it legitimizes them a little bit both. In one way, I think Xbox wants to say, hey, have a Switch as your side system. And Nintendo's kind of more like, hey, cozy up to Xbox as your other system. And they're sort of like passing it along, because I think they did a lot of sharing, what do you call it, when you can play games cross-compatibility.
Crossplay,
was a lot between the Switch, because the Switch was coming on with games like Rocket League and all these other things, and you obviously can't just have your own, good game. You can't just have your own little atmosphere. You have to have a bigger, because those games have enough of a niche following that if you just isolate to the system, it would be a smaller pocket of people. So smarter to open that up to all of the avenues of play, in which they started doing, and then Sony was like, not us, but then eventually Sony kind of I think enough people clamored and were like, listen guys, don't be idiots, we need to do this.
It'll be kind of interesting to see in the future, because I feel like, and it kind of goes back to my point earlier about how there's kind of this death of the exclusive. I feel like there's going to be a point where there is no such thing as an exclusive anymore. To a degree, anyways.
I think there will be exclusives. I think exclusives is what defines the system now. But I think you see less and less of it, in the sense I think what your idea of what you're trying to say is that I think there's going to be a lot less exclusivity within the systems generally.
Yeah.
But what defines whether or not you're going to buy either one is going to be the exclusives, right? The games that actually, because they're always going to have properties that you can't have, because that's the only way to really define,
But I think there is something too exciting about picking up a game and realizing, one of the things that blows my mind is, and not to plug a specific game, but one of the things that blows my mind about Genshin Impact is the fact that when you play this game, you could potentially be playing people no matter what, buy it on, get it, or I shouldn't say buy because it's free, but play it on PS4 and you could play Xbox games players. You can in the future you can play Switch players. You can play mobile players.
Actually, most of the friends that I have playing it are on PC. So
yeah, PC even. I'm pretty sure there's toaster versions of this game.
Probably eventually, yeah.
Where you can play it on your toaster.
Cool ass toaster.
But it's just, there's just something neat about that idea of like picking up a game and realizing you could cross those boundaries. Like it's kind of exciting.
But I think it's smart. I think it's actually a demand that's coming from like developers more so than anything because they know that they're going to sell their... Like if you're a third-party developer, you don't want to develop a game for Sony if like there's going to be like a lesser crowd of people playing it on that because like how are those people going to enjoy it if there's like 2 people, you know what I mean, on a multiplayer facet of the game. You need to open that up, and it's smart for them to do. They need to do that in the next gen. Hopefully that's like a big focus. Like crossplay needs to be considered, especially for fighting games, a niche thing like fighting games. You need to open that up so that like, because like the fighting games would be huge. Like I can't imagine like if I could play like Dragon Ball Fighters against like all the different avenues of people like game systems, like you would never have a downs play mode. Whereas like certain games you go in, they're like ghost towns.
Waiting for players kind of thing.
Dragon Ball's not one of them, thankfully, and there's like a few others that aren't. But like, I bet you if you went into like I don't know, like Street Fighter, the classic, remember the anniversary thing or whatever. Remember they came out and had an online.
Oh yeah.
And like you can't find anybody to play those games hardly now. Like but if you opened it up, you'd probably find at least a larger pocket of people on PC and
I think so too.
So I hope that's something that they really start to pay attention to. Your exclusives are what can I sell the system, and you don't need to worry about the other stuff. I know they're trying to like make their ecosphere or whatever exclusive. They're trying to say like Sony especially was bad for this, whereas Sony was like, if you're in Sony, you can only be Sony people.
Sony does what Xbox don't.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. So Sony was really, and they took a lot of slag, and that's like they've done some things, but they've kind of loosened up real fast. Like, whereas Microsoft, when they came out, now Microsoft's kind of playing swinging by the hips. We're the cool guys, giving everybody the guns. They're the cool guys. They're the cool guys of gaming. That's So I think Xbox definitely doing some interesting things to get back in the ring. Sony kind of sitting tall, not really messing up though.
Yeah, I kind of think like I think Nintendo just kind of it's interesting because it's hard to call it
dark horse coming up from
it's almost even weird to call them a winner because they kind of were like we're not going to fight.
Yeah, I know. They're over on the side dancing and doing their own little thing, but like they didn't fight. The other two are like knocking each other out.
Like I think it's fair to say in terms of this current gen that basically Sony knocked Microsoft out. Maybe not full knockout, but like
they definitely put them in the back foot. Yeah. Even to the point where there's a few. I don't know where this stands now, but there were a few videos and a few articles that came out that said Sony's still like the largest selling console out of the gate, and I think some of that has to do with like how popular we were obviously in the last gen, because people are looking, well, I can bring over every game I had before for the most part except for Bob's Burgers or whatever the random game that it doesn't play. There's like 10 or 11 games it can't play, but I never even heard of them. And then, but like I'm going to have a library in the new system that I don't have to worry about. And yes, Xbox did that better in the sense where they're like, hey, you can have a library from
straight back
1993 or whatever the heck. But their last gen...
I think that's what I'm curious about is... Because it can go one of two ways, I think, this next gen. I think either Sony's going to carry on the momentum of kind of the goodwill that the PS4 brought them, which I do think is no small thing in terms of that momentum. But Xbox is making some decisions that I think right off the bat is kind of really devoted to kind of gaining back some goodwill. Like basically telling you like our entire library of Xbox games right back to our original very first console are now at your fingertips. Things like picking up Bethesda, which is like one of the most beloved developers out there, and there's a laundry list of other developers as well that are no small acquisitions, and specifically devoted to like picking the ones that are beloved. It was really smart on Microsoft's terms. Is it enough to kind of overweigh get them back on the... Yeah, I don't know.
It's hard to say.
But they're both going to be huge contenders. This is a heavyweight battle for sure.
Oh, for sure. And there's no way that them buying these companies doesn't work out good for them. Because like if Microsoft was just like doing none of this, Sony would just walk all over them. But now they kind of own the North American RPG, North American action game, whatever avenue. So it's like... people are going to have a harder time. Like, I think you're going to make a choice early on and then just end up getting the other one down the road. Maybe you get the digital, like me, I think I'm going to get the one that I'm going to get, and then digitally get the digital one later on, maybe a year later once the prices drop a little bit, and then absorb some of those, exclusives that are going to undoubtedly show up in the run of the next year or so. And then also get the Pro, because you got to have that Switch,
Brought to you by. But I think that's kind of... I think we've kind of encompassed the entire retrospective at this point, where we're kind of tickling the next gen. Yeah,
we're getting to the close points. So.
Yeah.
So that's like the whole year, the last 8 years in retrospect, kind of like overview of what's happening. We're super stoked. I am super excited for next month. Ridiculously so, even. Like, I'm like, it's a big deal, man. And we're going to have a lot of videos, so stay tuned. We're definitely, like I said, we're going to have our weekly podcast.
With a new set that we're growing as we speak.
Growing it out. We're going to have probably just a weekly YouTube-y kind of centric thing where it's just a much smaller idea, maybe like, whatever new piece of news is in happening. We'll commentary on that, maybe give you a little bit of a rundown of what happened in the week. Or just some random crazy idea.
Skits,
yo.
Interpretive dance. We will have interpretive dance videos.
Yeah, with some beatboxing and all that good stuff. And so expect more. We're definitely going to be following the Sony Xbox next gen release hardcore. Like we'll stay with us, because we're going to be taking that ride. We've got some unboxings, some pre-Christmas action eve nonsense. We're gonna record our old age excitement for all y'all.
Yeah.
So like,
comment,
subscribe,
and tune in every Sunday for a podcasty video. And like Wide-Eyed said, every now and then we'll just do something spicy.
That's it. Peace.